Hello again and welcome back to Agroecology Around Arran, the podcast series exploring the stories that shape sustainable farming, resilient food systems and community life on a small Scottish island. I'm your host, Wallace Currie, and today we're exploring the theme of arable farming on Arran through an agroecological lens. Over the course of the episode, we'll meet farmers, distillers and bakers tracing the journey of locally grown grain from field to fork and glass. When you think of arable farming, crops such as wheat, oats, oilseed rape, beans or legumes might be the first thing that spring to mind. However, one of the reasons Scotland is world famous for whisky production is the large amount of barley grown here, with spring barley accounting for a significant proportion of the country's arable output. We begin at the start of the grains journey with farmer Donald Currie at Bellevue Farm. Donald grows malting barley on Arran and shares how the crop is grown, harvested and marketed, while also giving an insight into some of the challenges of arable farming on an island and how he works to overcome them. We're now here with Donald Currie of Bellevue Farm. Donald, how are you?
Fine, thanks Wallace. Thank you.
Good to have you here. Looking at Bellevue, one of the sort of main arable farms on the island, can you describe, I guess, the cropping systems here and where malting barley fits into the farm?
It's not just Bellevue. We've got other bits. We can't all grow to Bellevue. Bellevue's not big enough to grow all the malting barley. 4 different places we grow barley on Arran, taking some rented ground in Brodick as well, which helps, especially for the crop rotation, etc., which is quite handy to get it. I know it's 10 miles away. It's a lot of running about with tractors, but
Has that always been the case, that it's not just been at Bellevue?
yes, that's correct. Aye, and we've got fields down behind the distillery at Lag as well, 50 acres down there, so it's quite a bit.
With a focus on yield, Donald, how much barley are you lifting off the ground?
I think, Wallace, normally we're looking about, hopefully we get 2.5 tonne to the acre, which is quite good for this part. But 1 year we get 3.2 tonne to the acre, which is exceptional crop. That was fantastic. That's using about between 80 and 90 units of nitrogen per acre to keep it low as possible.
On the farm, is it just yourself running this?
Arable side and machinery side, it's usually Andrew. My son helps me. Donald's to livestock, but Andrew's quite a big help. He likes the tractor work.
Has that been quite nice? You've been doing this for however many years without the support of someone else, and now it's appeared.
That's right, it's great. It makes a wee bit easier life for me anyway, as I'm getting older.
Not at all, not at all. Yeah. With a focus on challenge again, Donald, we sort of touched on it earlier, but what are the biggest issues you're seeing on the field? Do you have pest challenges, weeds, diseases?
The weed diseases aren't too bad. We're quite on our own here, quite secluded on the island. Our biggest concern now is the deer. They really are an issue on Ireland. Not just grain crops and grass fields, they eat a lot of grass. There's one of my fields, I know there's one person counted 28 deer in a 7-acre field of barley one night.
It's almost a good stocking density of 4 to the acre, isn't it? I mean, it's a problem, a real problem.
Right. But that'd be most nights. I just counted that one night. That's a lot of deer.
And are they attacking the crop when it's, you've got grain in that crop? Are they attacking it before that?
It's just when it comes through the ground. Just at the start, the nibble, the weeds coming through.
And I think on some of the islands, I think Isla's worse hit than we are, but we also have some challenges from geese. Are you finding that?
That's right. Well, we in the field at Clackig below the Lag Distillery, we've got a lot of geese there now, which isn't very good. They do a lot of damage as well. So maybe we should have a geese count and try to get some compensation.
For sure. Well, it's happening up in a lot of the other
Absolutely.
islands. On the farm, Donald, obviously a pretty important part of producing an arable crop is what's beneath it in the soil. What's happening at Bellevue and the other farms that are involved to look after that?
That's correct. Well, yes, we do started putting a cover crop in now. It's sown just as soon as the barley is harvested as quick as possible to get established. It does and put good health back into the soil. It seems to work well, and we can graze it, sheep, etc.
And it's good that I think we sometimes forget when we consider an arable crop that or a whisky product or whatever that might be, that there is a circularity to that. You've got livestock involved in that as well.
Yes.
Where there's that period of time where that field would have been fallow. There's still something on it.
That's right.
Which is good to see that ground working.
I mean, we put a slurry onto it, the slurry and dung, the cattle. That helps as well.
We're focusing on Arran here, Donald. So growing barley on an island comes with its challenges. How has the climate, landscape, I guess, as well, shaped how you farm the crop? And also, is there any other challenges that on an island presents?
Well, on the west coast, as you know, it's not the driest part of the world, but it's maybe a quick growing season due to jet stream. I think that helps the bottom of it. And we're at sea level as well, so that we're a bit warmer as well. So it's not too bad to grow. Certainly with the weather pattern so far the last few years, it's usually kind of end of April we get it sown. This year's been very good with, we don't have the bad east wind we normally get in May, and dry and too dry, so it's really quite a good growing season this year. Fantastic growing season.
When are you normally lifting the crop off the ground? What time of year is that?
It's usually, we like to get it off kind of mid to end of August, last week in August, first week in September. Quite often I've seen the first week in September. If the weather breaks, that's it. Your booms.
And do you have examples of that happening when you've had an expected harvest and you've just not been able to hit that?
I've been quite lucky so far, but there was one farm where I do some contract work, and this farmer usually cuts 90 acres, and there was one year that we only got 3 acres cut. The rest wasn't cut due to weather breaking, and that was it. Massive loss. Huge loss.
Notable. What cost comes per production acre?
I think you're looking at approximately, it varies because of the price of fertilisers, etc. But you're looking at $4.50 an acre to grow barley, and if it's below £150 a tonne feed price, there's not much profit, if any profit in it at all. I mean, that's maybe not even including the eventual people are paying for ground rent, etc. as well.
And I mean, when you consider that example, 90 acres, £450 per acre cost, you're looking at, is that 40 grand lost that year? Yeah, no.
That's right.
A real challenge for a crop that's either supposed to generate income or be the cost saving and not having to buy feed. A lot of, or I think I'm right in saying, Donald, I think you mentioned there, all of your barley goes to Arran distillers. So as a farmer, what does that mean to you to grow a crop that ends up in whisky produced a few miles down the road? And I think in one case, a field that's next to the distillery, is that right?
That's correct. No, I do love growing crops. I've always wanted to do it since the distillery was there. I've got a good relationship with the distillery. It's a great feeling. It's fantastic. Great challenge.
We've sort of touched on feed there a wee bit, feed barley there, Donald. How does it differ growing malting barley to feed barley? And is there different requirements that you have to get in that crop?
Keep your nitrogen down for the quality of the malting barley itself. There's maybe a couple of extra sprays. I use the agronomist Cameron Ferguson, who's very good, so I just work with him. He keeps me right. It's not too bad, really. It's just keep on top of things, just keep an eye on it.
Is there a processing plant on the island, Donald, that takes your malting barley and it's ready for distillery, or does it have to go elsewhere?
No, it's got to. It's taken. They bring in barley for the mainland East Coast, and they take my barley out as a back load, so they're not going out empty. It's McCurdy's from Rossig, I've got the contract, they're very good. And they'll pick up my barley virtually straight. I've seen them coming to the fields with a lorry and waiting till I fill the lorry with the crop. It's quite handy. So I don't need to dry the barley at all. And it's straight out to the East Coast, and it's stored, and it goes through, it's processed, and it's brought back at a later date when it's ready.
The next sort of question that ties it all quite well in, Donald, is that a lot of food is produced on the island that's not going to be eaten or drank here. And I'm guessing a lot of the whisky isn't drank here, but it's sold here for sure as an Arran product. So when we look at that journey, Donald, from field to distillery, what does it say about the kind of food and drink system that we have here in Arran? Are you proud to be part of that?
Oh, very much. I think it's a great thing. For example, the milk from Tyfrech farms all used on cheese and vending machines, etc. I think it's great. Yes, very much. There's so much produced in Ireland now,
It's great to see. You're right about milk. We look at the meat side of things as well. It's always easy to jump to that, and whiskey's maybe one we forget because it's not something that you sit down to a plate and eat like that. How long have you been doing this with the distillery? Is there a whisky there to taste yet?
Yes, I've been doing this for 10 years now. And they've just released 10-year-old whisky now, the back end of last year. On the bottle label, it's got Bellevue Farm on the label, which is really great. I feel really good about that. And so far, they say the whisky's been selling very well. It's a good product.
I mean, I think you should feel good about that. That's a cool story.
Yeah, very much.
And maybe even more importantly, have you tried it?
Yes, it's good. Very good indeed.
Maybe if you're listening, you should try some Blag or Arran whisky, which we'll be talking to Fred about as we continue on with this podcast to hear more about that story. But for now, Donald, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Willis. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
In the next part of the episode, we follow the grain to the distillery in Lag, where we meet Arran whisky brand ambassador Fred Baumgärtner. As we tour the distillery, Fred explains how locally grown barley is transformed into a world-famous spirit just a few kilometres from the fields where it's produced. I just want to give a little heads up. We are in the factory and you can hear some background noise, so I do apologise in advance.
So we get malt in this way. So that is it coming from the maltster. Big lorry loads. It goes into a silo at the side here. And what we need to do, we need to turn it into this. This is called grist. And what we've done by breaking it open is we've got access to all that starch in here at this point. So that happens down here. There's a mill down here. And essentially, it's a rolling mill. So there's metal pins. So the first set of pins breaks open the husk, the outer shell, and the second set of pins, while they're close together, it grinds it. It's that consistency that we're looking for. And this is then what we call grist. That's also where the phrase grist of the mill comes from. And from grist, we hear it comes up here, and it goes up this pipe into a hopper, and it'll go along into the mash tun.
And just quickly, Fred, your grist is husks, flour and grit.
Yeah.
Is that right? So that's the three parts.
So there's three consistencies. We have a different ratio than Lochranza does, for example.
Okay.
So this is a classic whiskey ratio, 20, 70, 10.
Right.
20% husks, 10% flour, and 70% grit, the middles. Lochranza actually have a little bit more husks, a little bit less flour in what they do. Husks, they tend to add as a nice filtration bed. They float to the bottom and act as a water filter, basically. So Lochranza want a little bit more of those because they're unpeated. Flour is great because you can get a lot of sugar from it, but you add too much flour, you make dough and you clog everything up. And then grit, that's where most of your action happens. That's where most of your starch is, basically. So this is the mash tun. Nothing in here today. We mash on a Thursday or a Friday, so it is empty right now. But this is where we're going to put in our 4 ton of grist, 4 ton of grist, and we're going to add our 3 waters. So first water is 16,500 litres. Second water then brings it up to 20,000 litres. First water is about 75 degrees, then up to about 80 degrees as well. Pop it in, and we mix it all up. And the really important thing with the lag mash tun is, you see, we have this rake in the middle here. So what we do, this is called a semi-lotter. When the grist is in there, we rake it as much as we can. And this is the complete opposite of what we do at Lochranza. So with a rake mash, you're really agitating the barley, and you're encouraging fats, oils, and lipids to come out. They give you a cloudy wort because you're going to have more particles suspended in that liquid. That gives you the cloudiness, and it gives you that grassy, that oily flavour. Lochranza, we just let it sit, and you'll have that happen. Instead, it allows you to build esters, and esters give it a fruity flavour, and you create a clear and a slightly more gentle wort as well. So that's the fundamental difference. They're going to let their mash sit, and we're just going to rake it as much as we can to create grassy, heavy, oily, and they are fruity, light, they're gentle. 6 hours basically for the whole process. Anything that's left, so that's all that grist left over, this is what we now call draft. That goes away to local farmers. Again, someone we went to school with comes with a tractor. I saw him in the apparently last night actually. Takes it and it goes back to the farms, and the cows like to eat it as well. Great cattle feeds. So again, nothing's wasted, and again, more partnership with farms. A lot of the waste product is very circular. There's so little waste product in actually making whiskey, and so much of it goes back to the farms around us. We also like to use wood. This is much more traditional. So this is Oregon pine, Douglas fir from Vancouver Island in Canada. A lot of places will use stainless steel. It's cheaper, it's easier to clean as well. Obviously, we're having to steam it out here to make sure no harmful bacteria goes into it. So we like to use wood. It's a better thermal insulator. It also creates a bit of bacteria in there as well. So we kill harmful bacteria, but we do create some other bacteria. Ultimately, just adds to flavour as time passes, and you're not going to create that with steel. It's more organic. So, production. So next to us here, this is the wash still. So the first still that we use, 10,000 litres. We're going to take half a wash back. So 10,000 litre of that wash, basically a beer, fire it in here, and we will turn the steam on, and we'll bring it up to boil. Big kettle, steam kettle. As it will start to boil, the alcohol will turn to vapour, and it will separate up the neck of the still along this horizontal arm, that's called the line arm, and then down through these shells here. These are the condensers. So this is a tube and shell condenser. So inside the shell here, there's basically lots and lots of small tubes. We put cold water through those. So as hot alcohol vapour hits cold pipes, it condenses, turns back into a liquid, and it comes here and it flows out here.
Could you drink that?
No, wouldn't be good for you.
Yeah.
So this is called low wines. When it's finished, about 6 hours in, we'll have about 27% ABV. You could try it. It doesn't taste great. It'd give you a pretty bad headache. You wouldn't feel too good. Have enough of it would be really bad. Well, you wouldn't die immediately, but it's just not great. It still needs to be concentrated, purified. So low wine collected here, down this pipe, along over here, and they'll go into a tank below us on this side here. So they go down into this tank below me here.
Oh, yeah.
That's called the low wines and faints receiver.
Okay.
And from there, we'll take it and we'll charge it into our second still. And this is now the spirit still. A little bit smaller. We're going to put 6,500 litres in. Turn that heat on. It'll boil a bit faster because there's more alcohol, less water. So boiling point comes down. Alcohol turns to vapour, heads up the still, down the arm, down our condenser over here, condenses, and then turns back into a liquid over here. And over here, this half of the safe, the spirit safe, you see is a little bit more complicated. We've now got 2 of the bowls, pipes coming off them, and we have a wee handle up at the top. So this is where we're going to make our cut, where we're going to choose the bits that we don't want. So heads, parts and tails. So on this side, so the left hand side, we will take the heads and the tails. And they'll come through. So heads is half an hour. After half an hour, we're at 73%. We simply take this handle here and we cut it over. And this is now fully manual. So this is done by time, eye, experience. If we were to go to a bigger distillery, they may have a computer.
Automated.
And the whole thing will be automated. And the stillsman, the operator, would be sitting at a desk somewhere with a bank of computer screens in front of them and just monitoring that, basically.
I like this.
Everything done. We would call this semi-automated. So we do have a couple of panels. They help with more temperatures, change a few valves and stuff like that. But in general, most of what is done by actual hands, moving things. You've got to actually see what is the ABV, you make the cut point. So maybe one day or the other, a cut point might be 5 minutes later. That's what happens. So again, just have a little bit of natural variance. And it's more real. I like it more real in my opinion. So we cut on this thing, we cut to the hearts. We'll collect that for 2 hours from 73% down to 63%. We get about that 1,200 litres. That goes down the second pipe here and into the second side, into the intermediate spirit receiver, the ISR. And in there, it averages about 68%. That we pipe underground and into our warehouses. And we'll come back to that. In the meantime here, we're simply going to slide back over to our tails. That's what we're taking right now. And that's the rest of the alcohol. Takes about 3 hours. It's a bit too weak at this point. Again, the flavours, off-roads, they're not too good. And our heads and tails, they're going here and they're mixing with that low wines. So it's all mixed together. And that's what goes back in here. So again, nothing wasted.
And that 1% then goes into the next 99%.
Yeah. And basically, again, in here, there is some waste, effluent. So pottill and spent lees is what it's called. Yeah. But again, historically, we have taken some of that and given that to the farmers as well. They've used it as fertiliser. I don't think it's happened this year, but in the past we have done that as well. So, draft goes to the farms, the effluent has gone to the farms, we grow barley, it all just works together. And you can see all the fields around us. We have got our huts. That's going to go underground here into our warehouses, which are down here. So we take it and we dilute it down to 63.5% ABV. So that's what's called filling strength. And that is basically an industrial standard. Not everyone does it, but most people will fill their casks at 63.5% volume. We fill basically 50 casks every 2 weeks. So 100 a month, if you want to put it that way. And we'll look at casks later on a little bit. I'll pop it in there and it has to mature for at least 3 years. Then it becomes whisky from spirit. So there's about just over 30,000 casks in these 6 warehouses.
Back in the studio, Fred tells us more about the whisky making process on Arran and shares some fascinating insights into the history of distilling on the island. We're here now with Fred Baumgärtner. Fred, how you doing?
I'm really good, yeah, thanks. How are you, Wallace?
I'm good. And Fred is here talking about both Lag and Arran Distillery, talking about the whiskies here in the south of the island and also in the north of the island. So just to kick off, Fred, we've been hearing about barley grown at Bellevue, and we spoke to Donald earlier on. When that grain arrives here at Lag, what's the journey from barley to glass?
So I know you talked about Donald, so you grow the island, it'll go away to be malted, and we'll get malt back. Local barley is only a small portion of what we do. So for Lag, it's about 13% of the production per year. But we'll get a big container, it'll come from the maltsters, and we'll store it on site, both here at Lag, both at Lochranza as well. And basically, it is the same process as we would do make a normal whisky, though the barley can act a little bit different than what we do as well. So you take that Arran product, the Arran barley, and you're just adding a little bit to it. You're refining it and turning it into spirit whisky.
What would your feedback of this whisky you hold there be?
I love this one. I'm a big fan of Arran 10, classic Arran 10. It's a great whisky. I call it like a shelf staple. Everyday drinker, you can't go wrong. Everyone should have a bottle of Arran 10 at home. That's like my opinion. It should be law in Scotland, to be fair. But the 10 barley, when this came out last year, it's just everything that the 10 is, but just so much better. This is my favourite Arran whisky, genuinely. I'm not even saying this. Like, this is currently my favourite Arran whisky. It's so much oilier, spicier, creamier. And maybe it is a psychological thing. Maybe because it is, I know that barley was grown, 5 minutes from where I live, outside the distillery that I work at, and it is a wholly Arran thing, and being, an Arran boy, you're an Arran boy, it makes it so much more special, I think. It just tastes good as well.
We speak about this when we come to the final episode with Alistair Dobson, that there's a lot of good products of whatever food that is, whatever drink that is around the world. But Arran has a really good story in so many different places. And just for reference, when Fred's talking about how close it is, if we were on the other side of the building we currently sit in, you can literally see the field. You could literally throw a stone.
And you can just see, because they just ploughed it literally a couple of days ago, so you can see all the furrows. I was waiting to get some barley in there.
Yeah. It's I do like that part of it. And we're here at Lag, Fred, and that was built to produce a sort of different style of whisky from what we have at Lochranza. What makes that spirit unique, I think, is quite easy to the untrained, I guess, eye of someone who doesn't know whisky. You could say, well, it's a whisky on Arran, it must be similar. What's the difference between what's in Lochranza and what's in Lag?
So with Lochranza, with Arran, we're making, it's a very light, it's quite elegant whisky. It's fruity. Depends, is it apples, is it orchard, is it dark fruits? But at its base, Arran, Lochranza is a super fruity whisky, and importantly, in general, it's unpeated as well. So it's not a smoky whisky, which is quite unusual. When Arran opened back in 1995, there were a lot less distilleries than there are today, and especially on the islands. You had Islay, had a whole bunch of distilleries, most of them famously peated. Jura next to it, also usually a peated distillery. You go up to Skye, you have Talisker, peated, and then you had Highland Park up in the north as well, sometimes Scapa, also peated distilleries. So when we opened Arran and we chose to make it unpeated, it was super different. It was not what you expected from an island distillery. And that was kind of the point as well. So it was a little bit different. But fast forward 25 years later, the world's quite different. There's a lot of distilleries. Peat's very fashionable as well. People are really into their smoky flavours. And there's no point for us to do Arran 2.0. Like, we wanted something different. Peated Arran was super popular. We didn't quite have the capacity to make as much as we wanted to. And the more we made, the less of the normal Arran we could make as well. So it just made perfect sense to build a second distillery, but this time embrace a completely different style. So if Arran is unpeated and fruity, Lag is now peated and grassy. It's oily. It's a green note.
From your perspective, Fred, how does that locally grown grain influence the character of the spirit?
Great question. I think the big one is the oiliness. So I'm not an expert in growing barley. That's what Donald's for. Because of the West Coast, the weather's a bit different from, say, the East Coast, where most malting barley comes from. The barley tends to be a little bit stronger, a little bit thicker as well. And then that translates into production, it's stickier. When we do the mashing in the mash tuns, it tends to retain more water. It can be a lot harder to work with as well, you get a little bit less yield coming from it as well. But all that kind of hardship translates into a much oilier, much thicker spirit as well. With the Arran, it's really noticeable. If you do try Arran 10 to Arran 10 barley, you can tell there is difference in texture. It's a lot thicker. Lag, slightly hard to see because lag's already quite a thick whiskey as it goes. But it does, for me, it's the texture. The texture of the local barley is totally different. And it's not just our whiskey. You see, local barley is just a cool concept, but it's a very west coast of Scotland concept. Because I guess if you're up in Speyside, the bar's local anyway, isn't it? So it doesn't make sense. But there's a lot of sites around us as well. Friends, we have other distilleries also do local barley, be it here, be it Kintyre, be it over on Islay as well. And you see that kind of, the obviously it's different, but you do see that commonality of oilier, thicker texture as well. I think that's what makes it really cool as well. It is hard to work with, but I think it is worth it at the end.
Yeah, sometimes that extra stress, that extra challenge produces more of a story,
Totally.
produces more of a product. And for a small island, which Arran is, it's quite a remarkable connection between farming and distilling, a big part of the whole focus of this podcast series. How important is that relationship with local growers in particular, Donald?
Using something that is 5 minutes from where you are, it's just so special. And then to have that relationship with local farmers and do things together as a community, as a partnership, I mean, you can do it elsewhere as well, but it just makes it so much more special.
There's an illicit history here in Arran. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Oh, it's so good. I think Arran, people think of Arran from a whiskey history, they think of a very modern history. They think of 1995, because that's when we opened Lochranza, and then obviously 2019 when Lag came. But there's a massive kind of forgotten history of distilling on Arran as well. Arran was not in isolation. It has the same past as Kintyre, as Islay, as Gia, as all these places close to us. And especially over that kind of Victorian period, the 19th century, lots and lots of illicit distillation, especially where we are here in the south end of the island, because you had, I mean, this is the agricultural area of the island. You had all your communal farms, your clachans, they're growing grain, they're growing barley, like we use with this whiskey on the island. But for them, because it was quite a hard life, it was subsistence farming basically. For a lot of them, they knew if they were to distill some of their crop into spirit, kind of more like we had here, they wouldn't have put it into casks like we do today. It would be a clear liquid. That's where aqua vitae comes from, the water of life, because it was just clear. The Arran water, as it was called. They knew by making this, they could make a little bit more money as well. It was also a massive part of social life. You know, barn dances, weddings, funerals, wherever, you would need to have some whiskey at it as well. So everyone was doing it. At one point, there's a great kind of bit of history we have. Over in Campbelltown, there used to be, it might still exist to be fair, but a coppersmith called Robert Armour and Sons. If you go to like Springbank's distillery, you can still see his name on some of their equipment. But he had, his official front was he was a coppersmith, a joiner, but he also used to make illicit stills basically, a secret. And one day they were knocking through the walls in this house, I think, and they found some of his jotters where he had his sales recorded. So it was a period from the 1810s basically. And in that period, he manufactured 200 illicit stills for the kind of west coast where we are, so basically from Arran up to Gia, essentially. But 50 of those stills came to Arran addresses. 12 of those were in Slidbury Village, which is a village just up the hill from there. So that's a massive amount, just came across the Kilbarron Sound into the south end. Christ Wallace, probably some of your ancestors were probably involved in this some way, shape or form. It's probably a still hidden away from somewhere in your shed.
How amazing would that be if there was?
Yeah, it would be amazing, wouldn't it? Yeah. So yeah, they were making this whiskey to avoid paying tax. So that's what he did. I was a massive part of kind of the Arran economy at this point. People were smuggling, the amount of whiskey was smuggled off this island over to Ayr to sell everywhere. And at one point around this period, Arran whiskey had a fantastic reputation as being some of the best whiskey you could buy in Scotland, because it was made really carefully, really slowly as well. But then that just died down, and then obviously whiskey kind of production ended basically on Arran until we opened in 1995. But it was a massive bit of lifestyle, especially of the south end of Arran here. So with Lag, we are kind of rekindling a little bit of that whiskey making history down in this bit of the island as well.
There won't be much more than 12 houses in Slidbury. There might be 20 something in Slidbury. It's not a big village, so that's quite interesting to hear. Fred, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ross.
For our final interview of the episode, we speak to George Grassie, who's been baking on the island for 10 years and runs Blackwater Bakehouse. Born and raised on Arran, George spent several years living on the mainland and abroad before returning to the island with his young family. Today, the bakehouse produces fresh artisan bread using high-quality Scottish-grown organic flour and heritage grains, and has recently expanded into a new site in Brodick. Our conversation explores everything from business and baking to heritage grains, sustainability, health, and nutrient density. We're now sitting down here with George Grassie of Blackwater Bakehouse. George, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Nice to be here, Wallace.
George, you run Blackwater Bakehouse. Can you tell us how the bakery began and what led you into baking bread here on Arran?
Well, I would say serendipity and blind luck or misfortune, depending on which way you think of it. I'd just finished a bakery project in Norway and been making my bones and many mistakes over there, and thought I was going to be able to do some damage in the UK. Didn't know where I was going to be, and was in conversations with the baker incumbent at the Kinloch Hotel, where the Blackwater Bakehouse has spent the last 10 years. He looked quite like he was going to retire and he wasn't sure. And I looked like I was quite interested, but I wasn't sure. I was looking at a house on Arran, but I hadn't decided whether I was going to do that. So we weren't sure. And then the decisive factor, I think, was probably learning that I was going to be a dad for the second time. And yeah, baby number 2 was a kind of thumping pulse that ticked like a bomb, saying make some decisions and moves. Really, it was just, if I get the right house and I get that agreement with the bakery, then I'll live here. And it happened, and so I do.
So if someone was to come to Blackwater Bakehouse, which will be in a new location very soon, excitingly, what products can they expect to find?
Standard issue of what I'd call modern artisan, which is traditional breads from anywhere around the world. They're all quite similar, but every region's got distinctive expressions. Italian breads are quite distinct from French, from English, from Scandinavian. So I like to use all those influences. So I'd call it a European style of artisan bakery. Very popular in other bakeries too. So that is the bread angle. Pastry, as and when we have seasonal fruits, we'll put them in our pastries. We'll work with forage stuff. So it's loaves and pastries. Not so many cakes, scones, white rolls, because there are people that do that already here. It's nice to do something different. So the niche market is, I would say, sourdough. Everything I can be sourdough, I try and make that way.
And I think it's easy to hear a baker's and think, okay, they should all be selling the same thing. But the other bakers you're referring to is a completely different product. It's a really different product that's being sold. So I think there's space for both hugely.
I think if people stop and think about what they could buy from a bakery, they'd be astonished. You can be thinking sandwiches, you could be thinking sausage rolls, tatty scones, pancakes. The sheer repertoire of things that people bake is enormous, and no one bakery can really cover it. And I think for identity and good, healthy competition between bakeries, you stand on a part of that range and just do that well, and everybody will know what you do compared to the next person.
Yeah, it's the whole being a master, for want of a better word, of one instead of a jack of everything.
Ideally, yeah. Yeah.
And having tasted George's bread and pastries, I would say that would be a fair comment.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. Your bread's built around sort of long fermentation and traditional methods, George. What difference does that make compared with more industrial bread making?
You can't really compare the two. I would tend to say nowadays you've got what are called flour products bread in a supermarket. That would be junk to a baker. A real baker would say that's not something you could, strictly speaking, classify as bread. Bread has to be fermented dough. That's just flour, water, salt, maybe yeast or sourdough. And if you ferment them and then bake them, you have bread. Supermarket production does not follow those rules. The Chorleywood process, it's been in place since the 60s, is a miracle of food science in that it produces bread for the masses, but it's not, strictly speaking, bread. You've had that experience where you take a nice piece of sliced white bread, crunch it in your hand, and it stays in this nice doughy mass. And as a child, you used to think that pappy stuff might have been fun to chew on for a minute. That's dough. that's not what people can eat. So you need to bake it and you need to ferment it. So that's what long fermentation gets round. So you think a day ahead and you're doing the same thing as other bakeries, but by doing things over a longer period of time, you create fully fermented dough. And that dough becomes nutrient rich because you're unlocking some of the nutrients within the flour. You're adding some by the addition of sourdough, which is a kind of soup of bacteria and yeasts that swap each other's metabolites. And that becomes, in its own way, kind of unlocking of the nutrient in the flour. And you can do more to render your loaf digestible through that sourdough fermentation. And then with a good aggressive bake, you're going to get very good keeping qualities. It allows you to add more water into your dough. Water hydrates the flour, and that allows it to then ferment. It releases the sugars and the starch. It helps kick off enzymatic processes that break down gluten and other chains and molecules in the flour. And so you have a complete keeping quality within that. So you've got this very nutritious loaf that keeps for longer. And that's probably the short answer, is it just better for you and it keeps a bit better. That's a good start.
You're working with a very old yeast culture. Can you tell us the story behind that and why it's important in the bread you produce?
The age of a starter is something a lot of bakers talk about. It's mostly irrelevant, except for one thing, which is that if you know the age of your starter, it means that you've been tracking its feeding. You have to feed these things regularly. In a bakery, you want to feed it once, maybe twice or even 3 times a day. By feeding it's really just flour and water that is bubbling. And to keep the bubbling going, you have to feed it more flour and water with a portion of that bubbling stuff in it. You inoculate it and then off it goes again. That's been happening to mine for probably 35 years. It's a combination of 2 starters. So I made one about 16 years ago. Just started it where I was living at the time, which was in a nice leafy part of London on an arrow boat, surrounded by traffic and ducks all at once. That was my pride and joy. And then I went on a baking course with a French baker, and part of his send off at the end of his class was to take a piece of his. So I combined it. Bath starter, which is where the baking school was, and my own. So yeah, it's about 30 years between them of continual care. So it's that observation of tradition. It's a bit like getting up and doing your Tai Chi. You know, if you have that level of discipline and attention to it, you can boast about your sourdough's age. It makes no material difference to your fermentations. So you could have a 500-year-old starter. It means that people have been watching that getting fed. It's like a fire that never goes out. They had those in the Highlands, you know, never let the peat fire go out. And that's the story of a starter. It doesn't affect how it tastes and what it's doing in the fermentation, but it's a better story, and it's a real thing, because ultimately people make bread, and that's long forgotten.
We've been sort of looking here, George, at Arran as a food system. A lot of produce produced here. There's obviously a lot of Arran products that don't have Arran raw materials in it, which is fine. But could there be some discussion about the possibility of growing heritage grains such as maybe spelt on the island, and what excites you about that if we could?
Everything about that's interesting. There's no reason we couldn't. That's what people did here at the time of the Stones. The Neolithic peoples farmed grasses, and we know results are in from local digs that they were working with what we're calling ancient grains, but they've got names like emmer, spelt, einkorn. These are quite primitive versions of our modern wheat, and they've been in use for 4,000 years, maybe hundreds of thousands of years. They've been around and they've been eaten. How they've been fermented and eaten by different peoples, we don't know, but there's evidence of them here in the Blackwater area. So bringing that back is fascinating. They belong here as much as any grass does, even if it's introduced by humans. These kinds of grains thrive on poor soil, which in general Scotland seems to have for lots of different reasons. So I think it'd be a great experiment in seeing what things work. There's things like beer meal, which is a type of barley, very ancient form. That grows uniquely in Orkney, 1 mil called Barony Mill, the only beer mill, maybe the only one of its kind. And they are a kind of, unique ecosystem. They've got the beer mill growing on Orkney where trees don't even like to stick their heads up, and yet this barley thrives. Probably Vikings were growing and farming that, and Iron Age people before that. The history goes back. Long as people have been in the Isles, these grasses have come with them. So that's interesting. I think that's part of this heritage, and to use it again makes sense, especially if it's going to be an alternative to the disasters of monoculture. Wheat has become a monocultural crop. It's a badly engineered crop now because it's so vulnerable. Genetically, it doesn't withstand much. And because of its efficiencies in reducing stalk length, you're compelled then to use fungicides and pesticides to make sure that it doesn't rot from the ground. These are all taller stalks. Brings back ideas of wheat weaving, thatching, the use of straw for other purposes, packing tatties. Whatever it is you use straw for, it was never a waste product. I think reimagining it for a modern idea, especially if you can then just turn it straight over to a baker like me who's going to mash it into a beautiful loaf, that's what people have missed. And it's funny because people don't understand. When you taste one of these ancient grains in a loaf form, it's not quite like anything you've had before. It doesn't smell like a loaf of bread. They smell amazing. Loaves of bread in general always smell good. Even a bad loaf smells fantastic. But this stuff smells like cake. And it tastes like warm bread cake all at once. It's dark and it's rich, and it's the reason people stopped moving. The reason people stopped and stayed in one place at all was because they had grass. Until then, we didn't need to be anywhere in particular. Just go where the wild animals and the berries grew. Grass made people change their mind, and it's because it was good. It's not because it was easy, because it's definitely not. To get grass to mill and flour and bread is a whole set of food processing. And this is original food processing. Done simply, it's perfect, but it's not easy. So the reason it was done is because it's damn good.
Maybe one day we can have that, which sounds like, that damn good experience sounds dangerous because I would live off of it.
But you could. There's actually a piece of research where they profiled the nutrients within emmer and einkorn. They're quite similar. Einkorn's a monococcum, so a single set of grains up the axe of the seed head. The story is, it's not ideal to live on that bread, but nobody's sure how long it would take to die eating only that bread. So the myth that man cannot live on bread alone might be roughly false. This is nutrient dense enough that you possibly could subsist on this bread for an indefinite period.
But George, when someone eats bread baked here in the island, if that was to happen, what sort of part of the landscape do you think the food story will hopefully have that person tasting? And also, when someone leaves with bread you have currently, what are they expecting to feel and taste?
In answer to the first part, I think if you had a locally grown grain and it made the impression that it should, so you had this experience of this warm, sweet, nutty, aromatic loaf, which these grains produce, you'll create a new impression. Smell and taste are hugely evocative memory triggers. So you form a direct memory of that smell to this place. That would be a wonderful experience to give people. If you think about it more sort of mechanically, you've got experiences through the growing. So you might see the fields where it's growing into this bakery. You might even see my mill milling it in the bakery. I've got a small sort of stone mill that can do quite a decent loaf of bread. That changes the way you taste things. Just the sound of the environment can change the way you experience taste of things. You've probably seen Heston Blumenthal taking it with sounds of the sea while you eat as seafood dishes, and that's something. To create a full sensory experience of seeing grains growing and then somehow getting them in your face that's going to be special. So I would love to see that. But right now, I'm doing that to the best of my ability with the grains that we do get. So they're all British. Many of them are grown in Scotland. So I use a lot of rye and the beer that I mentioned, as well as wheats that you can get from various different organic growers throughout Central Belt. That's something that we kind of tick the boxes of. We haven't got hyper-local, but we could. And so that's something I'd like to see. You get to sleep at night as the baker and as the buyer because you know that you've bought something without any ites, as they call them, no sulfites, no fungicides and no pesticides. And so you keep all of that, all those ides out of it, and you've got 3 ingredients. The simplicity, but this complex thing that happens. Do simple well.
I like the thought of eating something that doesn't sound like you need a chemistry degree to mention.
That's it. Yeah. Yeah, if you lose count of the ingredients and you can't pronounce some of them, then you know it's not food. It's simple, really.
George, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure, thank you.
Thank you very much. After talking to George about his incredible baked goods, I'm feeling both inspired and, well, to be honest, a little hungry. The prospect of bringing some of the island's heritage grain varieties back into production and eventually creating a loaf made with Arran flour is a really exciting one. There were lots of agroecological threads running through our conversation in this episode. We heard about the value of short supply chains, Donald's use of organic fertilisers and cover crops to maintain soil health, and the importance of keeping nutrients cycling within the local food system. During our visit to the distillery, we also heard another example of how little goes to waste on Arran, with draff and pot ale from the whisky making process being returned to farms and used as livestock feed and fertiliser. It was also fascinating to hear from Fred about how Donald's locally grown barley contributes to the character, flavour and identity of Arran whisky. Once again, we encountered strong themes of circularity, cooperation and pride in producing high quality food and drink that is intrinsically connected to the place. By linking farmers, processors, distillers, bakers and consumers through local supply chains, more of the value created by arable farming stays within the community. At the same time, these connections help strengthen local identity, support rural livelihoods and create a food system that's more resilient to future economic and environmental challenges. Thanks again to all our guests and thank you for listening. Join us next time as we continue our journey around the island, exploring more stories from the people shaping Arran's food and farming future.